to YouTube Live, hosted by the National Cancer Institute. My name is Michael Weingarten, and I'm going to be today's moderator. Today we're going to be talking about funding opportunities and resources available from the NCI's Small Business Innovation Research Development Center. And today I'm really happy to be joined by two of our grantees, Aruna Gambhir from CellSight Technologies and also Guy Diperro from Chrono Therapeutics. So maybe we could just spend a minute or two. Aruna, if you could maybe give us a little bit of an overview of your company for the audience, that would be great. And then we'll switch over to you, Guy.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. And thanks for the invitation. I'm Aruna Gambhir, CEO of CellSight Technologies. We have a positron emission tomography imaging tracer that allows you to visualize immune response to immunotherapy early in the treatment cycle. So as many of you know, immunotherapies do not work in a large patient population, and there's a great need to figure out whether immunotherapy is going to be working in a particular patient or not. And that's where our product fits. That's the area of interest for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Aruna. And Guy?
Sure. Nice to be here today, Michael. Nice to see you. So I'm the sole founder of Chrono Therapeutics and the inventor on each of its granted patents. And we're bringing to market the world's first programmable transdermal drug delivery system that delivers nicotine in different amounts at different times of the day to help smokers quit. We're able to give nicotine to preempt pattern cravings that smokers have, particularly before they wake up in the morning. You program it like an alarm clock and you wear it on your body. We've also have embedded sensor technology to allow us to know whether or not you're actually wearing the device and taking the medicine, because patient compliance is really important. And the third aspect to the device is a behavioral app that's seamlessly tied to the nicotine delivery to allow us to better help with the psychological issues, not just the physiological issues. I'm also the founder of Indapta Therapeutics, which uses a super preferential subset of natural killer cells to fight cancer.
Great. Thanks so much, Aruna and Guy, for giving us those overviews. So we're going to go ahead and run through kind of an overview of the program right now. If you do have questions, and I encourage you to send your questions in, there are two ways that you can do that. You can enter questions in the chat box in this YouTube Live, or you can post them on Twitter. And our Twitter handle is @NCI SBIR, and you can use the hashtag SBIRchat to send us those questions. So why don't we go ahead and get started. I'm going to just give you a little bit of an overview of the SBIR program for those of you who aren't real familiar with the program. So SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. It's one of the largest sources of early stage funding in the country. At the NIH as a whole, it's about a $900 million program now. And at the NCI specifically, it's a $150 million program. So we are funded by Congress. We're what is known as a congressionally mandated set-aside program. And what that means is we actually get a percentage of the NCI extramural budget every year. And when Congress reauthorized this program back in 2012, they changed the percentages so that they gradually increase each year. So the percentage set aside devoted to the Small Business Innovation Research Program and the Small Business Technology Transfer Program has actually grown to about 3.65%. So over the last 6 years, our budget has almost gone up by 50% from where it was. So why is the program important? Well, when I meet with companies, which we do a lot by going to key outreach events to really learn about areas that you're interested in potentially applying in, companies often tell me that SBIR is kind of a lifeline for their companies when they're first getting started. And the goal of the program is actually to fund cutting-edge technology development projects that can meet patient needs in the area of cancer prevention, cancer detection, and cancer treatment. And at NCI, we fund technology development projects really across the entire cancer spectrum. So if you look at our portfolio, at any given time, we're actually funding about 400 different projects. About 35% of those projects are in the area of cancer therapeutics. About 20 to 25% are in the area of cancer diagnostics. Another 20% in the area of cancer devices, which includes areas such as cancer imaging technologies, as well as radiation therapy. And then we invest about 10% in the area of research tools and another 10% in the area of digital health. So it's really a program that is wide-ranging, and if you're working in any of those areas, we encourage you to take a look at the program and to contact us about potentially applying. So what are some of the eligibility criteria in order to apply for the SBIR program? Well, first you have to be a small business concern that's organized for profit here in the United States. You also have to be few hundred or 500 or fewer employees, including affiliates. Usually in the biotech arena, that's not an issue in terms of meeting the eligibility requirements. And you have to be 50% greater in terms of your U.S. ownership by individuals and independently operated, or 50% majority owned by multiple venture capital operating companies, hedge funds, or private equity firms. Let me just go on to a few more aspects of the program. We fund both grants and contracts. Grants tend to be investigator initiated, where you as an applicant are working in a specific area. You think you have a promising commercial opportunity, so you apply and propose the technology that you want to proceed in developing. For those types of investigator-initiated projects, we encourage companies to actually come in and apply under what's known as the SBIR Grants Omnibus Solicitation. That comes out once a year, and it has 3 different receipt dates, which are in April, September, and in January. We also come out with a range of very targeted funding opportunities. So we do that once a year, and we do that using the contracts mechanism, because these targeted funding opportunities generally are very milestone based, and they're very product focused. So we're actually, just in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be releasing our contracts funding opportunity. And if you're interested in seeing what those areas are, we're going to actually have 11 targeted funding announcements. What I would strongly encourage you to do is go up on our website at sbir.cancer.gov and sign up in order to receive updates from our program. You just have to give us your email address and a little bit of information about yourself, and then you'll automatically get all of our new funding opportunities, or whenever we announce a new program, we'll also send that to you too. So why don't I actually just, at this point, why don't I turn it over to Guy, and then we'll go to Aruna. And maybe Guy, could you maybe tell us when you first applied to the program, which funding program did you apply for?
So we applied for the merged phase 1, phase 2 Fasttrack application. And that was actually critical to enable us to have both the phase 1 and the phase 2 reviewed simultaneously. And that was helpful to ensure that we had the second round of funding coming along right after the first one. So there was a continuity of development, and there wasn't a gap in the funding. Often when you have gaps in funding, it could be fatal, because you lose your human resources and you lose continuity of product development. So we received, for the first one, was the Fasttrack merged phase 1, phase 2.
Thank you, Guy. Appreciate that. How about you, Aruna? Which program did CellSight apply for originally?
Yeah, our first grant was for the contract grant, actually, phase 1. We needed that money to get us enough preclinical data then to go on to the next phase. But it was milestone driven. There was a topic that was very targeted for us, we felt. And so that's what we applied for and got, luckily, and that allowed us to get enough data to then go on to the next step.
Excellent. So Guy, you mentioned that you applied for the Fasttrack application, which is the combined phase 1 SBIR and phase 2 SBIR, it might be helpful for me to just give a little bit of an overview of the different funding stages that folks can apply for.
Sure,
So,
and one thing I've left
sure.
out was that it was a $2.23 million grant award in total. So it was about 250,000 in the phase 1, and then another approximately 2 million in the phase 2.
Great, thank you. So just a little bit of background. So SBIR has different funding phases. These are not clinical phases, but the titles are funding phases. So the first opportunity for companies to apply to the program is under applying for what is known as an SBIR Phase 1 award. Again, that can either be a grant application or a contracts application, depending what your situation is. Phase 1 SBIR is a feasibility study. It tends to be about a year's worth in duration. And as Guy mentioned, funding, the NCI will actually fund Phase 1 projects up to $300,000 in total funds. Most of our projects are in in terms of applications that people send in, tend to be in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. If you're successful with your phase 1 application and you get some really promising data from that, then you can come back and you can apply for a phase 2 SBIR. A phase 2 SBIR involves the continuation of the project. It involves the full research and development of the technology, whether that's a therapeutic, a device, a diagnostic, or one of the other areas that I mentioned a minute ago. And typically that's a 2-year-long project, and companies can apply for up to $2 million in funding under our phase 2. Now, Guy mentioned another mechanism that we offer at the NIH. It's called the Fasttrack, and that is the combined phase 1, phase 2 application. And in that case, you would combine the total amount of funding available would be the combined levels, and that would be up to $2.3 million in total funding. And the benefit, as Guy mentioned, of the Fast Track is if you have a significant amount of preliminary data already when you apply to the program, then that enables you to develop a strong application that would then convince peer review that you're actually ready to come in for this combined phase 1, phase 2 application. So actually, Guy, it might be helpful for folks to know a little bit about the amount of preliminary data that you had when you came in for the Fast Track.
So we were a little bit unique. Our first product off the platform was an OTC, over-the-counter product, and typically those get funded a little later stage than typical RX. So we had proof of concept human data on a device, and excellent in vitro data. That's PK data showing that we can give you the nicotine that we want to give you at exactly the time we want to give it to you at. But the device was very rough, clunky. So the money that we were going to get for the phase 1 was to help do more in vitro testing and to help solidify some key parts of the device. And then the phase 2 was to build out the rest of the device according to GMP, FDA manufacturing guidelines, and run the PK trials. So we did have some human data, but it was on a very rough device.
Okay. Aruna, I don't think you've come in for the Fast Track yet. Is that correct?
That's right. For the imaging product, you need a lot of in vitro, in vivo, in mice, rodents, etc., and then healthy human volunteers, and then followed by actual patients. So I think it's harder to do the Fast Track as an imaging product.
Okay, thank you very much. So when you, as an applicant, are getting ready to submit a funding application, we advise all applicants actually to contact us and to contact our program directors. One of the things that we've done that's a little bit unique at the NIH is we've actually set up a center at the NCI whose only responsibility is to manage the SBIR program and individual SBIR projects. So what that means is we actually have 10 program directors at the NCI who are experts in all the different areas that we fund. And one of the things that we can offer potential applicants is the ability for you to actually talk to our program directors before you apply and to get advice on the specific aims of your proposal. So what might be a little bit helpful for folks, Aruna and Guy, is I know that each of you took advantage of that. Could you maybe, Guy, talk a little bit about the assistance that you received by working with one of our program directors and really how that was critical, as you were putting together your application?
Sure. I think it's interesting because I had never filed for a grant before, and I didn't know that you had the fast track. So when I met with Dr. Andrew Kurtz, he alerted me to the fast track opportunity, and I realized that $2.3 million was a meaningful amount. I think that would have been enough, I'm thinking to myself, to de-risk. So Andy was instrumental in telling me about the phase one. He was instrumental in spending the time to help me refine the application, particularly the specific aims page. That one page, if I could encourage you folks to get that one page really distilled, really concise, and really powerful, because that will give you the framework you need for the entire application. So Andy was really helpful to do that. And he was also helpful walking me through a few of the restrictions. When you have a sub-awardee, there's only a certain amount the sub-awardee can get. If you have a consultant, there's only a certain amount that you can get. The company needs to get a certain percentage of the money so that they're not funding purely virtual companies. So Andy helped with all of that and really helped get this fast track started for us. Also, I'd have to say, Patty Weber, we got 2 fast track applications, a second $2.3 million fast track. Patty Weber was instrumental in helping us as well, because those funded the behavioral app and the sensor and the efficacy trial. So she was very, very helpful in helping the efficacy trial design.
Great, thank you, Guy. That was a great explanation. Aruna, how about you? I know you also, when you were first starting up CellSight, you talked to us also very early on.
Absolutely. Our program director is Deepa Narayan, and I encourage everyone who's thinking about applying to reach out to a program director that's more specific to your area and bounce some ideas about the aims. But make sure you do it early, because it's not very useful to do it right a week before you have to turn in your application. And also, it was useful to talk to them because to the program directors, because they're really your advocates within NCI, within the SBIR program. So it's very important to have a good relationship with them before you start the application, during the process, and post getting the grant. And one other thing I must mention is that they're not only helpful to direct you to when, if the aims look good or not, but also perhaps more helpful when you shouldn't apply for a program. Because we were thinking of applying for a particular program, and I bounced that idea to Deepa, and she suggested, given that we didn't have enough data, that we should probably wait. And so that was actually quite helpful, because otherwise you're spending a lot of time on something that's not going to get funded anyway. So I say get talking to the program directors early and get their feedback, and be friendly with them.
Thank you very much, Aruna. I greatly appreciate that. So as I think most folks on the line probably know, that when you apply to the NCI SBIR program, just like the rest of the NIH, your application will go through peer review. Typically, that peer review will be through the Center for Scientific Review, or CSR. And the criteria that are used for SBIR are going to be similar to what they would be for an academic grant. But one thing that is extra and of added importance for SBIRs, in line with the goals of the program, is there is an emphasis on looking at the commercial potential and the commercial opportunity of the technology that's being applied for. Maybe Guy, do you have any thoughts on anything you'd like to share on your experiences with peer review and going through the peer review process?
I was impressed with the domain expertise and level of diligence and the comments that we got back from the peer reviewers. So Well, my advice is don't underestimate the peer reviewers. These people are smart and they're experienced and they're going to catch things. So I would say most importantly, make sure that your specific aims are meaningful and they reach key inflection points, because the reviewers are going to look at that. And make sure that you have the right team, because the reviewers really are going to look very carefully at the resumes and the domain expertise of the team. So very, very impressed with the peer reviewers. I would not underestimate them.
Aruna.
Sure. I think it's, we didn't get 100% hit rate on all the grants we applied through the SBIR. So I think what is important to do is, even if you get denied or if you get the grant, to really go through the comments and the reviews, because they are helpful. They're giving you different perspectives. And in going through this peer review process actually does add credibility to your idea to external investors or pharma companies also. So I think it's a very valuable process, and I think I appreciated getting all the comments and feedback through the comments that you get back after the grant has been processed.
Yeah, that's a great point, Guy and Aruna. And everyone who applies to the program will get what is known as a summary statement in return. And I know, Aruna, you can use the summary statement, the comments from peer review to help you. If you don't get funded the first time, then that can be very helpful to you as you're drafting a new application.
That's right. That's what we actually did this last go around, and hopefully we'll be getting that grant.
Yes, thank you. One thing that might be helpful is to give folks just a little bit of a sense of what the success rate is in terms of applying for SBIR grants or contracts. For phase 1 applications, the success rate is in the 10 to 15% range at the NCI, and for phase 2 applications, the success rate is in the 15 to 20% range. Those numbers change a little bit from year to year based on the total number of applications that we receive and the amount of funding that we have available. But in general, those are about what we're able to fund in any given year. Maybe I'll get back just for a second here to the different stages of funding available from the NCI. I mentioned phase 1, which is a feasibility study. Phase 2, which involves the full research and development of the technology. And there's another funding mechanism that we actually developed at the NCI about 8 years ago, and we call it our NCI SBIR Phase 2 Bridge Award program. And this is a follow-on to a Phase 2 award. And what it allows companies to do is the ability to apply for up to $3 million in additional funding after they've completed their Phase 2 SBIR. And the reason that we created this mechanism is, particularly in the biotech space and the cancer space, we know that companies have a hard time when they're in the early stages of development raising that critical funding that they need from either the venture community or from pharmaceutical or device investors in order to take their company to a key inflection point. So we provided the Bridge Award, where companies can apply for up to $3 million in additional funding. And we structured it in such a way to help small businesses attract funds from private investors. So one of the goals of the Bridge program is to incentivize private investors to invest maybe earlier than they would have jointly with the NCI on these promising projects when they're at a key stage of development. So that is another funding opportunity, and you do have to have received and been funded under a Phase 2 in order to be eligible for the Phase 2B Bridge Award program. At this point, why don't I move on to another question for both of you, Guy and Aruna. Could you maybe just talk a little bit, and maybe we'll start with you this time, Aruna. Why has the SBIR program been so critical to the development of your company?
You know, the venture community and investors are not very enthusiastic about imaging diagnostics at this moment. You know, it's all cyclical. Right now, we're not the favored child. So you really do need to have solid data and show proof of concept farther along than you would otherwise to get these investors and pharma companies, et cetera, involved within to move the product forward. And so without the SBIR funding, it was really hard to get external funding sources. So, you know, in the field that we are in right now, it was absolutely needed that we needed the SBIR funding to get us to the state where we have been able to attract partnerships with pharma and other investors.
Thank you, Aruna. How about you, Guy?
Sure. So the different grants that I was awarded played different roles to the company. The first one was able to provide that critical mass to de-risk the technology and attract the leading Silicon Valley investors. We raised a $34 million Series A after that, and then another $50 million Series B. The second fast track that we got was more to continue our partnership with NCI. I think the investors are very impressed when you have a partnership and you have favorable scores from the peer review, like Aruna had mentioned earlier, and like you mentioned, Michael. So the second one was to continue that partnership and relationship and have you as one of members of our syndicate, along with some of the other prestigious investors. And one thing that you didn't mention is that we've got some preliminary good news on the $3 million grant. We filed for the $3 million phase 2B, which I think that is terrific in the sense of it allowed us to help other investors see the path to commercialization. When you focus and distill on getting a company from a 0 product company to a 1 product company, that becomes extremely helpful. So yeah, I would say it played different roles, but critical roles at each juncture of our development.
That's great. That's great information. Thanks for sharing that with us. That's very helpful. Before we go on, I just want to remind folks that, again, you can send in questions, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. If you could, maybe for those watching, if you could refresh your feed. If you don't see a chat box on your feed, just go ahead and hit refresh, and that way the chat box should come up, so that's a real easy way for you to send us questions. Okay. Let me go ahead and move on to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that SBIR offers, that we offer at the NCI, just some of our other programs outside of the funding opportunities. So one of the things that we just started doing about 2 years ago was putting on a 2-day workshop that we call Federal Resources to Accelerate Commercialization. And our goal through the program is to let all the companies that we're funding, to make them aware of other resources across the federal government that they can tap into as they're pursuing their SBIR project. So as an example, most of the companies that we fund, if you have to go, most of you are going to have to go through FDA regulatory approval. So at this event, we actually have representatives from the FDA come and talk about the regulatory approval process and really the critical steps that a company needs to go through in order to achieve regulatory approval. And then we open up the opportunity for you as a small business to actually meet with those representatives from other agencies. So we have representatives from the FDA. We also have representatives from CMS, which is critical to your small business in terms of developing your reimbursement strategy. We also invite other parts of the NCI to come talk about other resources that the NCI offers that you as a small business might be able to apply for, and other programs from across the NIH that could be of real benefit to your company. So what we do is we try to tap into all these other resources that are available across the government that could be really beneficial to you as you're moving your technology through the early development stages, through preclinical development, and ultimately into clinical trials, and really try to tap you into the resources that'll help you ultimately be successful. Some other things that we do is we also put on other workshops that are more targeted in nature. So as an example, the NCI SBIR program invests in radiation therapy and a number of companies in that space right now. So just last November, we did a workshop on targeted radiation therapies with representatives from the FDA and also from the DOE. And the goal was to really create that interaction between our small businesses and between the FDA as they're starting to put together their regulatory strategy, and really for them to also give some input to the FDA so they can understand some of the challenges that our companies face. So I think we had, as an example, we had about 15 of our companies who actually participated in that workshop, and they found it to be very helpful. Another thing that we do at the NCI SBIR program is we also put a major focus on helping connect companies that we're funding through the SBIR program with follow-on investors. And that becomes really critical, and Guy spoke about this a minute ago, but SBIR funding alone in most cases is not going to be enough to take a company all the way from early stage development all the way through commercialization. So what we do at the NCI is we have a network of relationships with the venture capital community, with large pharmaceutical companies, and with major strategic device companies, where we can help make some really critical connections for you. So what we do is we invite companies that we're currently funding once a year to apply to participate in our investor initiatives program. And then when you apply, your application is reviewed by a panel of about 20 to 30 different investors, many of whom are going to be active in the space that you're working in. And then they come back and tell us which of our companies that we're funding they think that are mature enough and that are ready to tell their stories to the investment community. And for those that do make that cut, we then fund those companies to go and participate in a number of private investor events around the country. So Aruna, I know you were able to take advantage of our Investor Initiatives program this past year. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about that experience and how you directly benefited from it?
Sure. Apply. If you're thinking about applying for this, go ahead and apply for this part of it, because it was very helpful to CellSight. We participated in Resi in Boston, Bio in San Francisco, and Bio Network in San Diego area. And I'll talk to the one about Resi in Boston. We were in an area that we showed posters, and these were all NCI funded companies. And it does take some effort because you have to pay for your airfare and your hotel, so there is some cost to us, but it's well worth it, because at this Resi conference, you kiss a lot of frogs. They will come by, and you just have to talk to everybody. But there are investors who are looking at external innovations, and so that's where I met one of the main contact for us, who then went back to his company, asked for a slide deck from me, and we went through a few conference calls and meetings, and eventually led to a partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim in Germany, where they're sponsoring a clinical trial with our product. So it took a while from the initial meeting till when the actual deal was done. But if it wasn't for that Resi meeting sponsored by SBIR, I wouldn't have paid for it out of pocket on my own, because it costs money. So it really was helpful for us to actually go through that whole process and then close the deal. But it took a while. It took about a year or so.
Yeah, and what we appreciated on the NCI side was that you were an active participant in this, and I guess the thing is, we at the NCI kind of provides the opportunity to apply to the program, and then we pull together this panel of investors to actually help do the vetting. And once you make it through that process, I think that helps really open some doors for you and for other companies that do go through the process.
Yeah, and so I think also people who are reviewing probably, can also contact you separately, because I have received inquiries separately as well. So, I'm not, we don't know who the reviewers are, and I don't ask, but you can get inquiries in other manner as well.
Very good, thank you. I want to move on to another program that we started offering 2.5 years ago. It's a program called the Innovation Core program, or I-Core, and it's a entrepreneurship training program. NCI started offering this program, as I mentioned, 2.5 years ago. We did it on a pilot basis, initially with just 4 institutes, and now we've grown the program so that it actually includes up to 17 different institutes, as well as the CDC. And the way the program really operates...
And Mike, maybe I can interject there, sure. Just because I remember when you and Christy came to ask my advice back in 2015 about the program, and I was excited about it. If I could just give a quick word about that. One of the toughest challenges is navigating the transfer from academia to industry, from pure science to commercializing a product. It's very difficult, particularly for people who haven't commercialized the product before. You're not just looking at science, now you're looking at who are my customers, what's their price sensitivity, what do they really want, what's the pain in the industry, what's our unique selling proposition, why are customers going to buy this, what's the regulatory landscape I'm operating under, what's the intellectual property landscape I'm operating under, is there reimbursement with this, what kind of human talent can I attract, what kind of partners. So these are a lot of questions that scientists in academia may not think about and may not distill ahead of time. So what I was impressed with the I-Core program was, this is giving academics and scientists and entrepreneurs a cheat sheet. Hey, you got some great science, but you really need to start thinking about these other attributes to commercializing a product. So I think it's a great program. I think it could save a lot of people a lot of time. I think it can help folks make a better grant submission, because if you have applied to a phase 2, you've got to have a commercialization plan. So you're going to have to answer these questions. So going through this free program is going to help you to distill this better. I know that 100 different interviews with customers may sound a bit onerous at first over the 8-week period, but it's going to really put information back to the companies so that you can distill much better your commercialization plan. So I sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to give a little bit about a feedback that I thought it was really helpful.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you jumping in there. That's very helpful. And Guy, as you mentioned, kind of the centerpiece behind the I-Core program is the requirement that companies going through the program conduct at least 100 interviews over the course of the 8 weeks. And I think that's one of the things that really separates I-Core from other entrepreneurship type programs, entrepreneurship training programs, is that it's really driven by the companies themselves, and it requires that the companies get out of the lab and actually get out and meet with a whole range of different customers that are going to be involved, step by step, and helping them define what their key value proposition is, what key need or problem is their technology going to help solve, who their key customer segments are, what their potential revenue streams are, what their cost structure is, what their regulatory path is, and what their reimbursement path is, and who are potential strategic partners that they might look to try to create a relationship with as they're developing their technology. So I-Core, over the course of an 8-week program, and actually we just finished the program today, the most recent cohort, you actually people, all the companies come together at the very end, and they all share the lessons that they learned. And it's remarkable to see the transformation in a lot of these companies from when they first started the program to 8 weeks later, and how much they've actually learned. So
I believe it.
It's really one of the most interesting programs I've had the chance to be involved with. So thanks so much for your thoughts on that.
Sure.
I did want to ask another question, and I think we're going to open it up to questions now. Let me just throw first question at you, Aruna, and then we can go to you, Guy. Do you have any tips to provide to companies as they're putting together their first SBIR application, of things that they should really be thinking about?
Sure, and this is based on experience. Start early and get feedback early from the program directors, and finish early, because when you're submitting it, there's always going to be some kind of issue that'll pop up, and you need a little bit of buffer time in order to be able to, submit properly. But I'd also suggest getting as much feedback from various different people as you can, because everyone's giving you different perspectives. Get feedback from different backgrounds of people, different experiences, so that you have the strongest application that you can submit. But once again, start early, finish early.
Very good. How about you, Guy?
Sure. One thing people may not pay attention to is the formatting and typos, and you would be surprised how sloppy formatting and typos, not having a slick presentation, can really detract even from the substance. You may have a meritorious substance, but the format's off, and you're gonna get dinged by the reviewers. So I would say, of course, pay attention to substance, pay attention to that specific aims page, making sure it's distilled, pay attention to your specific aims, make sure they're meaningful, but also pay particularly good attention to formatting and making it a slick document. Remember, you are trying to convince these people that you can raise money, so you need to have this appeal in the document.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate that input. I just got another question in that I wanted to pose to you, and that is, question is, do applicants need intellectual property protection before they apply for a phase 1 or a fast track? So my recommendation would be yes. I think you do want to make sure that you're protecting the IP before you apply. But again, I know this is something that's a real bedrock to a small business's success. So I'd love to get some thoughts from you, Guy, because I know you've done a lot of work in the IP arena.
Sure. So I think having solid intellectual property is a cornerstone of building a company. You don't need to have everything, but I think you do need to have some exclusive rights to your technology. Otherwise, how are you going to attract capital and human resources towards this if it's not protectable? You need to have some IP ring fence. Now, the understanding, many companies begin with IPX and they wind up down the road with IPY, but you need to pass the red face test to say, hey, our technology is in fact protected. So I think, I pay particularly close attention to IP. I think investors do. I think having some core exclusive rights to your IP is important, but certainly you don't have to have everything, but at least have something.
Thank you, Guy. Any thoughts on that, Aruna?
Yeah, our technology, we license exclusively from Stanford. So if you're working with an academic or technology that came out of an academic institution, make sure you work with the Office of Technology and Licensing at that institution to have all the terms and agreements set in place. So I think it is important to make sure that you have something solid, an agreement with the licensing office, because that is, that's part of your business, is that you have to protect your IP and make sure you try and get it exclusive, and look at all the regions in the world that they've applied a patent application for, and if you're happy with US only or worldwide, etc. But it is an important aspect to consider even before you apply for SBIR grant.
Right. And did both of you work with, I guess, patent attorneys as y'all were kind of putting together your IP strategies?
So I did. I wrote and drafted many of my patents myself as an inventor, but I also pulled patents from universities. So universities had some of their own patent counsel. Most recently with Indapta, we have taken this technology from universities, but I've also gotten my own patent attorneys to augment that, because sometimes there could be gaps and your interests can be unaligned. So I would say it's helpful, but you know, I wouldn't get too caught up in spending too much money if possible.
Yeah, and in our case, we didn't spend the money from our side because, you know, we licensed the technology from Stanford, and they have some pretty good patent counsel there, and they're very used to this. And the Office of Technology and Licensing, you know, made the terms all clear. You know, we did consult with a attorney, but not necessarily a patent attorney, because that part of it was all taken care of by Stanford.
Great, thank you guys. Another question, do the presenters, Guy, Aruna, do you guys see it worthwhile to hire grant writers when you're putting together your application?
I'll just give my experience in that, you know, we bootstrapped it ourselves because we don't really have that much resources in the beginning to go to and spend it on grant writers. And you have to transfer a lot of knowledge, I think, to really have an effective grant writer give you the application. But you know, maybe there are instances where that is helpful. We did hire somebody just for a few hours just to make sure the English and the flow of it makes sense. And that did help, but I'm not sure about, you know, transferring everything over to a full grant writer, because we haven't done it, and it might be helpful in other instances. It's just not from our experience. We haven't done it actually, so I can't say yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Guy?
Yeah, Michael. So I'd like to bifurcate that question just a little bit to distinguish between a grant writer and then somebody who just understands the administration of NCI and the NIH. I would advise not to hire a grant writer. They're going to take you in circles. They're going to act like a psychiatrist who asks a lot of questions but doesn't give a lot of answers. Look, there comes a place in a time where you've got to sit down, put pen to paper, and you've got to explain why what you have is new and exciting and interesting. So I think you've got to write the grant yourself. I think you can have an editor for typos and for format. I think that's fine. I think you can get a few hours from an NIH administration expert to help you a little bit with some of the rules and regulations. But when it comes down to writing the grant and selling the grant, you've got to put pen to paper. You've got to do the hard work yourself. That's my advice.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. Let's see. So I have another question here. The question reads, I would like to send a specific aims page to one of the SBIR program directors. Do I email the specific aims page to a central source, or do I email it to a specific director? What we would suggest you do is to send it, unless you already have an existing relationship with us, I would suggest that you send it to the following email address, which is ncisbir@mail.nih.gov, and then we can actually steer it to the person who has the right expertise in our program. I had another question about the SBIR Bridge Award program and what the matching fund requirement is. So what we encourage people to do is when you apply for the SBIR Bridge Award program, which is Guy also called the Phase 2B program, we strongly encourage you to have a fundraising plan as part of the application, where you show commitments from specific investors to provide the matching funds to match what you're going to ask for from the NCI. So if your application is going to request up to $3 million from the NCI, we strongly recommend that your fundraising plan also has that match for at least $3 million from other private investors. Let's see. Let me get to some more questions. Someone was asking a question about, can program managers provide suggestions on crafting suitable 6-month research program that doesn't undershoot or overshoot the time frame in the eyes of the reviewers? What I would suggest there is, again, I offered the opportunity for folks to send in your specific one-page on specific games. And what's really valuable there is first, in the first part of the page, maybe the first half of the page, really detail why the technology area that you're focusing on and why it's significant, and give us some input on why you see a problem that is not currently being met, and how you propose to address that problem. And then following that, get into details where you lay out your actual research plan and the specific aims of that research plan. We suggest that you keep it to about a page to a page and a half, so it's obviously going to be somewhat top level. But send that to us, and then we can get on the phone with you to talk about what you're planning for, and give you some initial feedback on that. Aruna or Guy, do you have any thoughts on that question, on specifically, I guess, on the specific games page, and any thoughts on how they should address that?
So, who they should send it to, or how they should make it better?
Just, I guess, more the content that is that really helps them stand out.
I think be crisp and clear in what you want to accomplish. I think you need to set forth what the significance is and how you're going to help people and how big the market is in the introductory section. I think that's important. But I think that having a very crisp deliverable that's understandable and that's meaningful to increase value and de-risk you enough to attract the capital that you're going to need, I think that's the most important part. The second part is people will have an urge to have it very cluttered, fit as much as they possibly can on that specific games page because it's just one page, and then it becomes difficult for people to read. I think it's better to have less than over clutter, and just have very crisp and short specific game deliverables. That would be my advice. I think that's important. If you catch them with the specific games page, then they're gonna be interested as they go forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also another thing is to make sure it's innovative, because it needs to add value to help move that area forward. So I think that's what a lot of reviewers are looking for, something that's innovative and doable. So don't promise too much, for sure, because these guys are all experts. They know what's doable and what's not. So a manageable amount, but innovative and crisp, like Guy said.
Right, right. Sometimes we get questions about from companies who want to pursue a really revolutionary project. What's something that's kind of really out of the box that they might not have a lot of data to support, but it could potentially be really transformative if it worked. Do you guys have any thoughts on those types of applications, and whether, I don't know if you've considered them yourself or not, but do you have any thoughts on that type of more of a revolutionary type application for SBIR?
I have a thought about that. If it's going to be a real moonshot, so to speak, and you don't have a whole lot of data to support it, but there's really powerful significance, and this can really help people, I think it's important to have other credible key opinion leaders behind you saying, we know that we have limited data, but we think that it's possible. We think that there's a path to it, at least one critical key opinion leader. So if you're going to step out on a limb with very limited data for something that's powerful, try to get at least one very credible key opinion leader to say, hey, we think that this could work. That could help bootstrap the lack of data.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Having a key opinion leader input, not only for out there kind of ideas, but also normal ideas. It's always good to be able to say, you know, feedback from XYZ is that this is, you know, drastically change the landscape that we're attempting to tackle. So it is important, but to get the buy-in of various KOLs.
Very good, thank you. I had one quick question, which was, can anybody apply for the I-Corps at NIH program? The answer on that is actually you have to have an active phase 1 SBIR or STTR from one of the institutes that's participating in the program in order to be eligible. So again, that includes NCI. We manage the program for the NIH as a whole, and then it also includes 17 other institutes. So if you're interested in getting more information on the program, please go up to our website at sbir.cancer.gov, and we've actually got links right there to all the eligibility requirements, as well as just more information about the program itself. Okay, so maybe we can move on to closing remarks right now. And I would love to just get any remaining thoughts you have. Maybe we'll start with you, Aruna, and then we'll close with you, Guy. But just if you could kind of give us your closing thoughts on how important SBIR has been to you, and where your company is going forward in terms of its plans. That would be helpful.
Sure. I am very grateful for the SBIR program because it enabled us to get preclinical data, go from that preclinical data set to healthy human volunteers to now we're in clinical trials. So without that SBIR funding, we wouldn't have been able to take the technology to the state that it is in right now. And we need more of that to be able to then make sure that it goes and fully commercializes. So having SBIR behind you not only helped us move the technology, but also brought in partnerships from pharma and other investors. So I think I'm very grateful for the SBIR program, and I hope the funding increases every year as we move forward with the program. I think it's very valuable, and I'm appreciative of all the staff at the program as well. Everyone works really hard, and we appreciate everything that they've done with the program.
Thanks so much, Aruna. And you, Guy?
Sure. Well, first, I mean, NCI, I think, is providing such a valuable service to help scientists move things forward before they can attract capital. I'm particularly grateful to Andy Kurtz, I should say. When we were in this critical stage in the very beginning, we had great data, something that could really save people's lives. But just because it was over the counter, we just hadn't reached the threshold. So, you know, after meeting with Andy and after him being an advocate to allow us to get the first fast track, the 2.23 million, it allowed us to go on to raise another 84 million, then another 2.3 million dollars with the NIH, then another 3 million with the phase 2B application. We're up towards $94 million. We think we're going to commercialize a product that's going to save thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And we may not be here if it wasn't for that first fast track. And we may not be here if it wasn't for, you know, Andy Kurtz, who sort of had the foresight to push this thing forward. So I would encourage everybody to step out. If you've got enough data to go for the fast track, try to get it. That's $2.3 million. If not, start the process soon so that you can get access to the next 2 million as quickly as possible. So yeah, happy to be here today, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you both for participating. We really, I think your inputs are so valuable for folks who are just looking at potentially applying to the program, just seeing kind of your experience is incredibly helpful. Really appreciate you being a part of this. So that's all the time we have today. Before we sign off, don't forget to join us for our multi-agency Twitter chat. And we're going to have a number of other NIH institutes that are going to be participating on that, as well as the National Science Foundation. And that's actually going to get going right after this at 2:15. And all the other institutes will be available, as well as the NCI, to answer additional questions that you might have about the program. So continue sending us your questions to our Twitter chat at NCI SBIR with the hashtag SBIR in caps and then lowercase chat. This will be a great chance to get your questions answered by experts from the different NIH SBIR offices, as well as the NSF too. And I want to thank you both for spending time with us, and thank you very much for joining us today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you,
Bye,
Michael.
all.
Have a great day.
Thank you.